All right, so hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode here on the Sordid Skeptics. Today we're going to have a rather weird conversation where we have to make the case for reality. So I'm kind of sad that we have to have this conversation, and I'm really hoping we can get through it without feeling like condescending jerks, right, Tim?
That's right. Hello, everyone. Um, it's also a case for objective morality,
Yeah, that's right.
and as opposed to subjective morality, which
Yeah.
is whatever we can make of ourselves.
And this is how far we've fallen.
Yeah.
Then now we have to make the case for objective morality. So let's dive in and have a little bit of fun with this, all right?
So basically, have you heard people claim, in one form or another, that there is no such thing as good and evil? Or they say something like, it's all subjective, or morality is relative, or everything is permitted, or, worst of all, nothing is real. So I've noticed in day-to-day conversations, I've seen it in the media, I've seen it on Facebook groups, I've seen these beliefs expressed in many ways, even in like certain new age philosophies and movements as well. It's a problem, and I just want to mention too that a lot of this material is based off the work of Mark Passio, who talks a lot about natural law and occult knowledge. So we'll be bringing in a decent amount of information that he's brought to us. So one thing he says is that moral relativism is the disease that is destroying humanity. So, what he means by that is that a morally relativistic people become an enslaved people. And how that's happened is because if there's no proper objective distinction of what's right and wrong, then anything is permitted, basically.
People just kind of fall back on their own subjective belief on what they feel is right and wrong.
And they become passive order followers as well.
Well, I mean, if you didn't have anything to orient yourself towards, that, might really be the only option that you've left yourself with, right?
Right. But this isn't just happening by accident. This is on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Because what Passio talks about is occult knowledge, since he used to be involved in a satanic organization, and he knows a lot about this stuff, and occult knowledge basically just means hidden knowledge.
Okay.
And it's knowledge that's reserved for the few. He uses an image of a pyramid, and at the top of the pyramid is where the occult knowledge is, and then at the bottom is basically the ignorance of the masses. And the point of this is that this knowledge of basically how the universe works, how morality works, even to a certain extent psychology, a lot of this has been suppressed, and we've been duped in a lot of ways. And there are forms of mind control being employed on us.
Okay, like what would you consider to be mind control?
Well, I would say you can find in certain religious organizations, because some of them, I would say a good amount of them, don't promote independent thought or questioning certain things that are being taught. Or
well, I guess if it wasn't really good for that institution, that would kind of make sense, though, right? It's like if they sort of think, well, everything has to be done this particular way, it can't really be questioned in any sense. And I think in that sense, that's usually once an institution has become too, I don't use the term xenophobic because I don't think it's the right word, but it's sort of, if they're not open to any sort of outside information, they sort of stagnate. Because eventually they're just going to get out-competed by other groups and taken over or assimilated or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But the other side of it is if you don't have enough of that, you have the chance of having contagions coming in, like literal viral pathogens. Right. So there was an objective moral reason for both positions. But the thing is, you never know which is the right position. You don't know if you need to close the gates or if you need to open them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, like you're gonna have to live with the consequences either way, right?
Right.
So this idea of moral relativism being a disease, I can kind of see how that's. Yeah, I can see where you're going with that, because I guess if there isn't something objective for us to orient ourselves towards, then the idea of morality sort of loses all meaning, right? Because then all you're talking about is preference. So why would you even have something called morality?
And that just goes back to our ego-driven preferences.
Right.
Or self-interested.
Yeah.
Like it's all about me, my own pleasures supersede yours.
But even the idea of self-interest is like, what does that mean specifically? Are you talking about like your self-interest now versus your self-interest in 10 years? Or the self-interest of you and your family and your community and all that kind of stuff? Like, if your self-interest also benefits everybody else, it seems like that would be a good thing to pursue. But I think maybe what you're talking about here would be everybody pursuing their own interests almost at the indifference or expense of other people. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. It's, well, some people are like that. Like, they are more, focused on their own needs. But it's also...
is it an excessive, like, inward focus you're talking about? Whereas rather than orienting yourself towards the people around you and some of the problems that you could help solve, you're sort of solipsistically looking inwards?
Yeah. And solipsism is
Yeah.
another kind of enemy that he mentions as well, where
I can see
I'm the only thing that's real,
Yeah.
and everything else is fake.
Yeah, well, it seems like those things would easily go hand in hand, right? If you're sort of if you have no moral objectivity whatsoever and everything is subjective or relative, then of course, like, it would make perfect sense that you think you're the only thing in the universe because you're the arbiter of all morality. Right?
But the three hardest words that could be spoken by an individual was "I was wrong."
Yeah.
Right?
No kidding. That's not an easy combination of words to string together in that order.
Right? And that's part of this natural law is an emphasis on self-knowledge and putting yourself together, sorting yourself out, as we've mentioned many times throughout this podcast.
Yeah.
It does start with the individual.
Yeah, and having a good relationship with reality. And understanding that, regardless of how you feel about it, reality doesn't really seem to care about your feelings. And once we can accept that, maybe we can properly orient ourselves towards things that'll actually work. Right?
Well, yeah, we can't have, let's say, too much right brain dominance, which is more focused on feeling and emotion and, our subjectivity, our preferences.
Well,
we want to have a left and right brain balance, an integration of the two.
Well, I like the way Peterson did that left and right brain stuff, because he talked about it being sort of like the realm of the known and the realm of the unknown. Yeah. And working together. So one of them, like, I think the left brain was supposed to be the area of the known, and the right brain was the unknown.
Yeah, it's the left brains are more intellectual, logical, reasonable part of you.
Well, you know what, I'm going to be honest, like, even like going through all this...
It's the masculine as well, is
all
what
the stuff
Passio would say.
Well, I mean, yeah, but I mean, he puts up the slides, but again, even like the stuff that I went through when I did the neuro stuff in university, like, it's not really the way the brain breaks down. I mean, there is contralateral, the way it differentiates the function of the left and right side of your body. Like, the left side of your body is controlled by the right side of your brain and stuff. So there is a split, obviously. But having, like, that much of an effect on your personality, I'm just not sure it's the right way to look at it.
Well, okay, what he would say is that there are imbalances. Let's just say for now that the left-right brain concept, it's more of a metaphor in a way.
Yeah,
maybe
fair
it
enough.
Doesn't exactly map out to the physical location.
Yeah.
But it's
sort of like a duality of self almost.
Yeah, so with the left, yeah. in a way, and we're striving for an integration of it too,
Right.
not an extreme focus on one or the other.
Because
So
the more those two split apart, the bigger you're going to be out of whack, right?
yeah,
So
exactly.
if you can get those things properly lined up in harmony, then you're going to get to have the ability to have boundaries and protect your interests as well as exploring new possibilities, which seems like a better orientation in the world than constantly being at war with yourself.
Yes, let's say, like, for example, with a left brain imbalance, you would see these expressions of a extreme materialism, or you'd also see this deterministic ideology where you can't change yourself, like everything's gonna happen no matter what, and you don't have any free will.
Oh, okay. So that's sort of like the locust of control idea, where on one extreme you think like I have no agency to control anything, and on the other extreme you think everything is your fault.
So like the internal and external.
Yeah, exactly.
Locus
Like
of
if
control.
those things aren't properly lined up with reality, you might think that something that isn't actually your fault at all is completely your fault and you're responsible for it. You're going to eat yourself up. And on the other side, if you believe that absolutely nothing is your fault and everything was inevitable, then, well, why would you be responsible for anything? Why would anything matter? If everything is determined ahead of time and there is no control or agency or free will or anything like that, then, why would you get pissed off at somebody who whipped a rock at your window? Why wouldn't you get mad at the rock?
Right.
There's no free will.
Right.
The rock broke your window. Why would you get mad at the person? The person didn't have any free will. They're going to throw it anyway.
Well, yeah. Well,
like, there's no difference between the person and the rock, right? It's like,
and the presupposition is that actions don't matter. It's
so
the person's actions.
So why would you get pissed off at it? But the thing is, they.
But to me that's insane, right? Because
of course,
there's no, because that person wouldn't take responsibility, and it would just be.
Yeah, like, listen, bud, your window was just gonna break anyway because somebody was gonna.
Don't blame me.
Don't blame me. I'm just the messenger. You don't want to shoot the messenger, right? I'm just.
But that's not how the universe works.
No, we hold people accountable for their actions, right? So I mean, I think like
the
whole idea of there being no free will, it doesn't really seem to stand up to a lot of scrutiny because we treat people as if they do have free will and like to be treated as if we have free will.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like if you get treated like you're some automaton that has no agency, you probably get kind of annoyed by that. I probably would.
So. Yeah, you know what? I just thought of an example from Stefan Molyneux. He would talk about how at one point his mother would be like screaming at him, just like getting bent out of shape about some insignificant thing, and then she would pick up the phone and talk to her boyfriend and whisper sweet nothings into his ear and act like a complete angel, right?
So it's like she could control her behavior.
Yeah.
She just chose not to. Right?
And sometimes we might assume that, okay, they're a certain way and then they're just getting, taken over by something. And yeah, maybe it relates to the shadow again, where our unconsciousness is taking us over. But we want to promote the idea that there is free will and that we can change ourselves for the better.
Mm-hmm.
And there is this line of thought of determinism, and even I think Sam Harris promotes this to a certain extent too. And so we have these higher up intellectuals putting these ideas out in a wide array, right? And I think it's detrimental to our progress, essentially. And
it doesn't seem to be helping all that much to tell people that they have no way of changing or improving their circumstances. And it doesn't really seem to be a very positive message.
Well, yeah, if you believe that everything is just going to happen automatically, basically that we're like animals and that our behaviors are pre-wired and we're just going to, automatically react to things like an animal would. But natural law, and this is one objection that I've heard from people, but natural law is meant for intelligent beings that have a certain level of consciousness, because we're different from animals, and that, we can't sit down and explain physics to our cat, or, talk to our dog about the law of thermodynamics, or morality. And
you wouldn't hold an animal morally accountable in the same way that you would hold a human morally accountable, right? Like if, you wouldn't expect a wolf to not eat you if it was starving. You know what I mean? You wouldn't sit there and think like, oh man, this wolf better fear the justice system because it'll definitely go to jail and be held accountable if it eats me. It's like, I don't think the wolf gives a shit. I'm serious. Like, it's just going to eat you, right? So
it's got its own animal instincts.
Yeah, and you probably wouldn't blame the wolf either. You'd probably be like, well, maybe you should stop, making wolf calls in the woods in the middle of the night by yourself and constantly trying to run into these animals and expecting them not to eat you, because one of these days you're probably just going to get eaten. I don't know.
Yeah. Exactly, yeah. So yeah, that's one, area of it.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to distinguish between what's right and what's wrong. And the way Passio describes it is, right is correct. It's based in truth. It's moral, which means it's in harmony with natural law and the consequences that'll happen. And a right is actions based in it that they do not result in harm to other sentient beings. So right action does not result in harm to other sentient beings. Now, a wrong is incorrect, not based in truth. It's immoral. It's in opposition to natural law. And it constitutes actions that are based in that they result in harm to other sentient beings. So, this comes to transgressions of natural law. So these include murder and assault, rape, theft, trespassing, and coercion. And I guess it seems kind of silly that we actually have to, mention this, but it's still occurring.
Well, I mean, any system of morality that you're going to try to propose is going to have to incorporate those things.
Yeah, these are the principles. These are the first and most important things that we're trying to...
Well, I mean, I'm not even sure if they go back as far as first principles, right? Because first principle will be something that's just an a priori truth that can exist independent of anything else. It's immoral to initiate force against an innocent person. I think that's probably something we can agree with, because you wouldn't be able to do any of that without initiating force. Except maybe trespass. You could probably be sneaky and get away with that. But it would still be a violation of property rights, which is in itself sort of an act of force or coercion or fraud.
Well, yeah. With natural law, he also says, all of this basically links all to theft. So if somebody was trespassing, that could be understood as stealing somebody's security.
Yeah.
The person who's being trespassed upon.
Well, it's an interesting thing to bring up, because what exactly is trespassing? Like, if, say, it's like a... Because, I mean, it doesn't elevate to the level of breaking and entering, right? It's somewhere in between you being in a public space and you being in a private space, right? So, or it's one of these places where you're in a public space, like a mall, but the security has asked you to leave.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't, now you are trespassing, right? So you're basically in a place you're not supposed to be, but it's not like you've broken into someone's home and have now. I mean, that's part of it, but that's it. I don't think it's elevated to that level. I think you can have trespass in abandoned places, which isn't quite the same as breaking into someone's home. I think morally.
No,
I just don't think it's quite at that same level, but it's still a crime and a violation of someone's privacy and their security and. What they choose to use their property for and all this kind of stuff as well.
Okay.
So,
sure.
And it's interesting that it's in there with things like, theft and rape and murder and all the most heinous of crimes, but, I think they all would fit under the realm of violations of property rights. Because if you murder someone, you're violating their right to use their own body, and you're violating their right to have a life.
Yeah.
So that's a violation of their property. It's because you hold people responsible for what they do with their bodies. Right? Because they own their bodies. That's why. It's like, if I hit somebody, I can't say, sorry, that wasn't me. That was just my hand. I don't own it. It's just part of my body. It's like, what the hell does that even mean? It doesn't mean anything. And of course, you own your body. So if you like damage somebody else's body, that's a violation of their property rights. It's kind of a weird, like, clinical and way of thinking about it, but that's what it is, right? Like, if you commit any of these heinous crimes against people, you're violating their property,
Right.
which is their body, or
Right.
or what they've created with their body, including, like a fence or something, as well as the money that they've used to put what they've created into a form of savings.
Mm-hmm.
So anything like that, theft or robbery, that's all a form of property rights violation.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So I think it all falls under that same umbrella. But I think now with this moral relativism that you're talking about, you get a lot of people who think, well, there's no real such thing as property rights. We can take from some people to give to other people to make things more of the way we would like them to be. And it just somehow there's this double think where they kind of get away with it morally
in the name of quote unquote equality.
the greater good, right?
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
Let's make things more equal and more equality. And it's like, well, why is that necessary?
Well, that's pretty much forcing, or I guess coercion, isn't it, in and of itself?
In a sense, yeah, because you're also putting those people in a system of dependency now, right? Because it's like, all right, well, we're just going to continuously give this group a bunch of resources. It's like, okay, well, what happens when those resources are no longer available? Now what is that group going to do? So now you have to continuously steal in perpetuity, continue to fund it. Because now they, and you see this now whenever time anyone talks about maybe cutting back on spending a little bit at the state level. It's like, well, now you're taking money from people. It's like, well, I suppose, yeah, if they were used to getting it all the time, it would probably seem that way, but fundamentally you're stopping taking money from people to give to them, provided you lower the taxes in accordance with what you're no longer paying for.
Right.
But this is a state apparatus that's like, it's huge and it's complicated and there's so many layers to it, and a lot of people are depending on it for their very survival. So what do we do about that? That's a very, very complicated problem.
Yeah.
But it's one of these things, if we keep kicking the can down the road, it just gets more and more expensive.
And if we don't know about our own rights and our own sovereignty and our own independence, and if we don't learn about these things and
you'd have no reason to oppose any of that then, right?
Yeah.
So I see your point, yeah. It's
right.
So if you can kind of get people to understand that it's like, well, the whole reason this system exists, you're also being, you've been handed this great culture and civilization, but you've also been handed the bill for it. and it's somewhere to the tune of about $45,000 per person in our country when you take into account. And this is just the money that's been spent. This doesn't even include unfunded liabilities.
Yeah, we were born into it.
Yeah,
we never had a choice.
No, we didn't have a choice into this at all. And but that's sort of like the greatest cliche of human existence, right? It's like, oh, I didn't choose to be born to be a caveman. Oh, this fucking sucks.
Yeah, but they didn't have governments or
no, they didn't.
States or
that's
some arbitrary authority that was granted to some individual.
Well, it's a sort of a technology that's kind of new, right? The idea of the nation state is only like a couple hundred years old.
Right.
Before that, you'd have different empires and all these other kinds of ways of organizing each other under kings and lords and all.
That's not exactly the best either. Because again, it comes down to who granted. How did God somehow grant them the authority? You know what I mean?
Yeah, and this is
and that it's not questioned very much, and it's like even in the media, like when the last week, everybody goes crazy for the new infant that's been born by Prince Harry, right?
Yeah, people are losing their minds over a kid that was born that they're never going to meet with a couple they've never met. Yeah, it's like okay, yeah, that's great. It's all.
And why are you giving attention to these people so much? And they're part of the problem too. They maintain.
Yeah, I don't know. The British
control.
Monarchy, it seems to be sort of a kind of a toothless institution at this point. Sort of a relic for the tourists. That's kind of how I see it. And
if they're so good, why don't they help make their society better and not hoard?
By what? They have a net worth of like a few $100 million. Like they're.
I think the Queen's worth a lot more than that.
I don't know why. Why would she her power doesn't come from money? She's the Queen. What does she need money for? Nobody charges her for anything.
No, but my argument is a good ruler should do whatever they can to serve their people in the best possible way.
Yeah, and the devil is not only in the details; it's the entire argument, right? Because if what they're doing is sort of totalitarian in some way, it's like, well, their idea of what the greater good for their people is might not actually end up turning out that way in the real world. because a lot of them have tried, various ways. Let's make it. I want the best outcome for my people, so I'm going to go screw over this other group of people, and it's like, all right, well, then this problem just sort of escalates, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know. There doesn't seem to be much evidence to me that they're, exactly making a positive
Which ones?
impact. The royals.
No, they don't do anything. But this is like they sort of abdicated their political responsibility a long time ago. It was sort of they had the separation of church and state, and then they sort of had the separation of monarchy from government.
Mm-hmm.
So now they have a parliament that does all that kind of stuff, but all the laws they pass need royal assent, so the queen can kind of say yay or nay on a lot of that stuff. But I imagine a lot of that's just procedural sort of treaty stuff with the EU and stuff like that. But
I guess we can agree, though, it's a fairly outdated...
Oh, yeah, but that's what I mean. It's not really a functional power center like it used to be. Like, the monarchy before was like, they could just dictate whether you lived or died on the spot. And everyone would be like, okay, cool, like, let's not go against what the queen says.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that person's gonna die straight up. But now it's sort of like, she just sort of shows up for royal functions and sort of, it's more of a theatrical role at this point. It doesn't seem to be as powerful as they were, like, say, a few hundred years ago. Because they're not really the ones calling the shots anymore.
No, not really.
The queen?
Well,
specifically? I just don't really see her behind the scenes pulling a bunch of strings and doing this or that to make the world worse.
Well,
like, what do you think?
What Passio talks about is that the dark occultists are the ones that are at the top, that they're running the media organizations, the other big corporations, the government, various other sectors.
Now, are these like specific individuals? And I guess the kind of begs the question is like, well, who are they? Right?
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't have any names.
Yeah, that would probably make sense because they would probably be that.
I don't think they'd want to be widely known.
Exactly, that's what I mean. Like, but this is one of the problems with it. It's sort of an unfalsifiable hypothesis, right? To postulate that there's a bunch of people up there pulling the strings. It's like, well, how would you know if it wasn't true? Well, it's like, well, I don't know. I don't really have any means of testing it. Because anything that you would say is like, well, what about this or that? It's like, oh, well, here's some way that they would have gone about preventing you from finding it out. It's like, okay, well, then how do we test that it's actually true?
I hear what you're saying. Well, the idea is that they're entrenched in all these institutions,
mm-hmm.
and that they use this knowledge of natural law to manipulate others.
Okay.
And you kind of have to listen to more about his experience within the satanic organization, but would you say it's so hard to fathom that people could use this for an evil purpose?
Like, have people been manipulating and screwing over other people for forever? Yeah, like, sure. That doesn't seem too surprising. That somebody who would rise to the top of a dominance hierarchy like that would probably want to maintain their position by any means necessary, including manipulating people and using whatever means necessary, including things like psychology and whatever else to ensure that they get the behavior they want from others. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Why is that?
But the thing is, there's people out there who can't even fathom that people are that smart or that they're that devious or they're conscious enough to even do that. Like, some people think humans are just so ignorant or they're lazy or there's another word, but you know what I mean? Like, is
naivety the problem? Like, there are certain people that are so naive.
Naivete is definitely
so this would be like the story of, like, the wide-eyed country bumpkin who comes to the city for the first time and basically gets robbed within 10 minutes because she's way too trusting of other people. So there's that attitude. Or are you saying that there's other people who would doubt that other people are that power thirsty that they just wouldn't believe that would exist? because maybe not a lot of people are that power thirsty, so they couldn't see themselves doing it. It's like, well, yeah, maybe that's why I don't believe it, because it's...
Or believing we're efficient enough to...
Yeah, but I mean, like, even look at like these like politicians. Like, some of these people are just cutthroats. Like, they'll say whatever they need to say. They'll lie to your face.
Yeah, and that's part of the problem. It's the age of deception that we live in, and they promote these lies, and that's...
Well, I think it's like, it's the age of deception has been everything up until the point where now we have things to counter it. You know what I mean? Where now you can take 2 news clips back to back and sort of show the politician saying one thing like a week ago and then saying the exact opposite thing today. Or saying something and then it comes out that it's in direct contradiction with the facts. And you can put it up and you can throw it online and it's available for the world to see within minutes.
It's a good point. We do have a lot of knowledge.
So the only reason I think people might think it's the age of deception now is because it's like, no, now we have just the tools to see how we're already in the age of deception. And it's always been that way. You know what I mean? The people in power kind of set the rules and the narrative and all that kind of stuff, and everyone has to toe the line or risk death.
But what gives them the right to do that in the first place?
Force. It seems.
And is that right?
No, it's morally reprehensible, but you know what I mean? If they cared about that, they wouldn't have risen up to that level of power to begin with.
Yeah, and they believe in a form of social Darwinism, too, which is essentially the strongest deserve to survive.
In a sense,
and any means necessary.
But it's almost like a perversion of what he was talking about, because Darwin was talking about the fittest organism surviving. So the most adaptable. And in a sense, that's sort of what they're doing. They're adapting in every possible way because they're so thirsty for power and controlling other people that that's like their one mission. And as soon as they get a little bit of power, they want more. And it's like an addiction. Right? But I mean, we don't treat them like addicts. Apparently we treat them like, I don't know, the Illuminati or something like that. It's like, okay, but I mean, this is like a natural human behavior just taken to an extreme.
Well, it's psychopathic.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, it would probably fit the definition, but I don't know. It seems like okay, once we've defined them as being psychopaths, it's like, okay, well, now what? How do you go about using that in the real world? Are we going to start, I don't know, looking funny at people we think are too ambitious or something? Is that the idea? Because that doesn't seem like it would work either, but... I think it's important.
Is money? Wouldn't you say we live in an era where money is one of these false gods?
Oh yeah. That's a cool point as well, because it's an idol that you sort of elevate to the point of saying, okay, well, if I can orient myself to something higher and I make that thing money, I can, rather than going around with like my tax return printed on my T-shirt, showing how much money I make, I'll just go around and give off signals like, look at this sweet car I drive and this big house I live in.
Yeah, it's a bunch of bullshit.
And all this, yeah, and it's like, look at all these fancy toys, but all it is sort of signaling, I guess, a superficial form of success.
Yeah.
So, but it's,
it's a like shallow existence.
A little bit, yeah.
And maybe you could argue, okay, how does that really affect anybody? Well, you know, people are free to make their own choices, right?
Yeah, but I guess in the absence of any other kind of role model, maybe they get sucked into that vortex as well. And that doesn't seem like a really great outcome for people, but it almost seems like if you fall into that trap, then the process is the punishment. It's like, okay, you want to go chase after all that material crap and think it's going to make you happy? Mm-hmm. All right, go for it. Have fun. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know, there's going to be a lot of people that make a lot of money off that attitude. They'll keep a lot of gears turning. You know what I mean? Keep a lot of factories churning out crap we don't need.
Well, yeah, I mean, is our purpose just to accumulate as many resources as possible and keep our families secure? And...
Oh, like that, the transition from citizen to consumer. Right. Where we used to call ourselves citizens, but now they talk about shit like the consumer, you know, confidence ratings and all this kind of stuff. It's like all they see is we're just consumers. Mm-hmm. You know, we go make money in order to consume.
Yeah.
And that's all we do, consume all the time.
And that's what they want to keep going. Rather than having an enlightened group of people.
But don't we all want to keep it going? You know what I mean? It's like every part of our job has something to do with consumption. Do you know what I mean? If all of us woke up at the same time and realized we didn't really need any stuff, we'd almost all be out of jobs. Because nobody wants to consume anything anymore. It's like, all right.
Well, it is a part of our existence.
Oh yeah, well, you have like farmers and like people that make, I don't know, clean water or something like that. In terms of people who, you know, like some of the stuff that people buy now is insane. Like you can buy Instagram likes. Did you know that?
Right. Yeah.
You can buy Instagram followers, real genuine.
Yeah. YouTube followers,
like AAA grade prime cut Instagram followers. It's hilarious. And the idea is like it's basically just people that are going to promote your channel and all this stuff. But
I could just fake my popularity.
yeah, I can just fake my popularity so that I can feel better about myself and show everyone how popular I am, so that they'll think I'm really special and sweet. It's like, oh my god, what have we become?
That wouldn't be true self-esteem, which is another episode that we've done before.
Yeah, but if you would literally buy that stuff, it's like, oh my god, it just seems so weird that people would pay for it.
Right.
I see the incentive, I suppose, if you want to kind of be like, oh, look at how popular I am. It's like, but deep down, don't you know, like you bought it yourself?
Or what about? Yeah. Sorry. What about these people who send out these fake emails that try to get like credit cards?
Oh yeah,
and whatever else.
Well, that almost seems like an easier thing to understand, right? That's just a financial motive. It's like you want money, so it costs nothing to send out 1 million emails because it's a free system. So you send out 1 million emails, you get 100 hits. You know, you get a few thousand out of each of them, you're laughing.
Oh yeah, but I meant people who are
like,
tricking people with like fake like websites and stuff.
Oh yeah, fraud.
To get their...
I deal with it all the time, man, and it's it's pretty insidious. But
people can deceive themselves into thinking it's okay because
obviously they do, or they're just sort of thinking, hey, it's kind of shitty that I had to do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. But I think you're right. A lot of them are probably thinking, hey, if I can trick these idiots into giving me their money, then I deserve it. And I think that's probably the attitude that drives a lot of it. It's sort of a sense of entitlement, right? It's a sense of entitlement to the unearned. And I think that's probably the crux of a lot of these issues right now, is that people feel entitled to that which they haven't earned. So they'll either take it, or they'll have somebody else take it for them. Right? And that moral relativism that you were talking about before, it allows them to justify that.
And avoid self-reflection.
Right.
Which is something a lot of the majority of people will avoid, and sure, there's a reason for that. It's difficult work to look at yourself in a very honest light and some of the things that you need to fix or get straight with.
Exactly.
Let's say.
And a lot of this self-work can obviously be difficult, and if you guys are going through that process right now, we'd actually love to hear how you're going through that process. So if you guys would like to drop us an email, you can always reach us at sortedskeptics@gmail.com. That's SORDIDSKIPTICS@gmail.com. And you can also follow us on Facebook, Podbean, iTunes, and Google Play. I think we're also on Stitcher if you guys are using that as well. And if you have any feedback for the show, we'd definitely love to hear from you. And if you have any topic suggestions or questions, we can definitely throw that into the show as well. So again, sortedskeptics@gmail.com.
Great. So it may seem we're kind of all over the place with this topic in a way, but we're kind of just scratching the surface. There's many facets of natural law and what Passio describes, and he for example, like he goes through a lot of definitions of words, so we get the proper understanding of what our words mean, because a lot of us don't know what like the Latin root of certain words actually mean, right? So it's important to get those things defined, right?
Yeah, because if you're able to control language and you can just equivocate the definition you'd prefer, then that gives you quite a bit of power over people that is probably unearned. Makes sense.
Yeah, very problematic, for sure.
So what does it mean to be sovereign and above all of this stuff?
To be sovereign itself, the root of it means to be above rulership or control. So the essential problem with assuming we live in a godless universe is who's left to rule? If a human becomes the highest possible authority, we have to answer to, then we are vulnerable to such horrors like totalitarianism, communism, and other ideologies that try to make their leader a false god. You could see it as an imbalance of too much order and corruption at its highest expression. So it's like, would you rather like to serve in heaven or rule in hell, kind of thing, in a way. And this is the important thing about acknowledging a God, and that we are born, we have this divine spark, and we're born with sovereignty. It's our birthright, and these people are trying to make us forget it or not acknowledge it, or through their systems of control. And there are other false gods that dominate our culture in the form of money, politics, government, scientism, which is an extreme form of materialism, certain forms of religion, and New Age spirituality. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't important spiritual truths in religion, but they don't go as deep as the esoteric traditions, or what they would call the mystery traditions. And this is what natural law is about. It's about this occult knowledge and the proper use of it. And natural law is essentially the recognition of a creator of the universe, which is dictated by universal principles that apply to all people of all places at all times. It is an objective morality, meaning it is grounded in reality, and it's not something humans made up, but discovered. Whether you believe it or it's irrelevant, knowing of its existence and applying it is what matters most. So the idea is, if you know how to act in accordance, I guess, with these laws, you're going to be able to make the changes in your life that you want to make.
But it's the actions that would be important, right?
Yeah, you can't do it without action.
Because
that's the problem
itself,
with The Secret, for example, which is another one of these New Age ideas that gained huge popularity.
And what was the idea with that? Was that you just put out whatever you want into the world, with your mind, and it manifests itself? How does that
work? It was mainly focusing on the intentions, your thoughts, and in order to manifest something. But if you're thrown out of an airplane, you can't just will a parachute out of nowhere, or
Yep. Very true.
Yeah, the physical laws are going to just happen.
They're going to come back and bite you in the ass big time.
Yeah. So it also kind of The Secret also kind of promotes this subjectivity, certain bad things that might happen to you or just meant to happen to you, and they're part of your experience, and you don't need to blame those people who did something horrible to you. It was just meant to happen, and it's all good, and you just have to focus on your attentions mainly. And this is something Passio talks about. He says natural law is the real law of attraction because it does have a focus on action, and having our actions aligned with our mind and our heart, essentially, our thoughts and our emotions. So
no, that makes a lot of sense, because if you believe one thing but you're constantly acting out of accordance with that, it'll kind of eat you up inside. Yeah, I think that's
cognitive
dissonance that's just constant, right? But I think the actions part definitely makes a lot of sense, because we all know that and accept that maxim that actions speak louder than words. If somebody says one thing but then acts in a completely different way, we don't go with what they said as a belief about their opinion. We say, well, you acted this way, so I'm going to presume that's what you actually think, not what you told me. Right? So we already know that actions are more important than this sort of new agey, just feel your way to happiness kind of nonsense. So I think if you learn how to act in accordance with natural law and the way the reality's actually laid out, you're probably going to find that you're a little bit less surprised with the kind of obstacles you get thrown, because those obstacles will also be in accordance with reality.
And again, there are certain requirements for change. If you keep doing the same thing over and over and over again, you're just going to get the same result. So, changing your thoughts, emotions, and actions about something will help you get a different result manifested in reality.
Yeah, do something completely different.
Right?
All right, so this is also kind of an old idea as well, and a lot of these ancient philosophers have talked about it. So we wanted to run through just a brief summary of what some of these older philosophers said. So let's see, Aristotle. So laws of man may vary from place to place. Laws of nature do not. So not of today or yesterday it is, but lives eternal. None can date its birth. So I think what he means by this is it doesn't really matter where you go. It doesn't matter what the laws of a particular town are here, 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 or here. But if you stay outside and it's freezing, you're probably going to freeze to death.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Like that reality doesn't change regardless of where you are, regardless of whether or not it's illegal to sleep outside.
It's weird. I got another example too. This happened on Facebook, and it's like, okay, in certain cultures, rape is permissible, basically, or assaulting your partner. And
so who are we to judge? Kind of, is that what the argument is?
I guess the argument is, well, no, it's just their culture.
So you're basically dismissing the heinous act by using that cultural relativism and saying, well, who are we to judge these, rapey people raping all their women and stuff?
Who are we to impose?
Who are we to impose our values of no rape on their rapey culture?
Yeah.
Maybe they just maybe they
did it. They did it for years and years.
They did it for years. Yeah. They did it for years and years. So that makes it.
And they can't change themselves.
No, they obviously have no agency. Like, look at them; they're bloody rapists. They can't help themselves. So you guys are racist for saying that that's wrong. It's like, are you people serious? But I think they are serious. I think these idiots believe this.
And that's a big part of the problem.
Yeah, so I mean, it's okay to sort of say that, hey, that behavior is wrong without impugning an entire group of people. It's going to be your opponent that sort of says, well, you're saying that whole group of people is rapists. It's like, no, I'm saying that one guy raping that one person, that is wrong. We should not tolerate it.
No matter what.
No matter what. None of this, hiding behind a group of people that you don't speak for.
There are certain things where there is no gray area for.
Yeah. It seems like a pretty cut and dry. That's not acceptable.
Right.
So if we can at least agree on that, at least we can kind of move forward. But it's like, if we can't, it's like, God, we're never going to get past square one, are we? It's like, all right, let's agree on the basics. No, okay. I guess I'll put the coffee on. We're going to be here a while.
And that's another thing he mentions, conscience. Conscience is these moral laws that we've all pretty much agreed on.
Yeah, they kind of been figured out over a little while, you know, what kind of works and what doesn't. Doesn't mean people follow them all the time. No. I mean, it doesn't seem to have much bearing on whether they're there or not. So let's see here. And so Empedocles, it's a horrible name. When he bids us kill no living creature, he is saying that to do this is not just for some people, whilst unjust for others. Nay, but an all-embracing law through the realms of the sky, unbroken it stretcheth, and over the earth's immensity. So you can't really say, hey, this action is immoral for this person, but it's moral for this person. The laws have to be the same for everybody. You know, regardless of who you are. Which is a true
equality.
Yes, and that's true equality under the same moral law. Where it's like, it doesn't matter who you are, you know, where you're from,
how oppressed you are.
It's like the same laws.
Or how privileged you are.
Or how privileged you are. Yeah, the same laws apply. So this is one of the things I find with people who go off about saying it's completely immoral to eat animals. It's like, okay, well, are you saying that the people who rely on eating animals for survival are also immoral? Because I don't think you'd make that argument if you had the opportunity to. But it seems like by saying that us doing it is, and they're like, oh, well, we have the choice to eat other things. It's like, well, that doesn't really play into the morality of it. Mm-hmm. That's just saying, well, if you can do something different, then it becomes immoral. Like, no, it's either immoral or it isn't. And I think it becomes very, very difficult to sort of say, take a behavior, but then subdivide it into other behaviors. Like, well, eating is moral, unless it's eating this. Mm-hmm. It's either eating is immoral or it isn't. Mm-hmm. And then you say, well, what about people like cannibals? It's like, well, let's try to stay on topic. Like what kind of eating would be the most immoral? It's like, well, you can't eat other people. It's like, well, not when they're alive, presumably, but what about eating dead people? Is that immoral? I don't know what system.
I guess if you didn't kill them.
No, yeah, that's what I mean. If you didn't kill them, obviously. That's a good point. Yeah, then it's like we don't really need laws for cannibalism because we already have them for not killing people. But, I mean, I don't think any system of morality that could call itself moral would say that somebody who is alive has to give up their life for the sake of not desecrating a corpse.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't see how those things could be congruent. Right? So if you're going to say it's immoral for you to desecrate that corpse and you have to die of starvation rather than do it, that doesn't seem like a system of morality that is in congruence with reality whatsoever.
Seems reasonable to me.
Yeah, just like a system of morality that doesn't conform to reality, you know?
Mm-hmm.
You need to get... Now it's better to have 2 dead bodies than 1. That's better.
Well, how's that? Yeah, and how's that truly justified?
How is that just? I don't know. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, would it be nice to not mess with dead bodies? It's like, yeah, let's not mess with dead bodies. God's sake, but this is what I hate about this crap. Where and I think it comes up from these. And Molyneux talked a lot about this, and he made such a good point where he's like, when people bring up these like the train track fallacy, like would you throw the switch to kill 1 guy rather than 5? All it is saying like, morality or ethics is just this thing that you can only do in the abstract and it can never be real and all this, and it doesn't matter what choice you make because it's bad either way. Like it's just a bunch of nonsense, and it's like, well, what about...
It's an oversimplification.
Yeah, it's an oversimplification.
It doesn't bear on reality at all.
No, like I think
that's not what it's for.
Yeah, when the rubber really meets the road, I think you have to know the difference between right and wrong, but also the difference between better and worse.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the biggest point here is that in emergency situations, the laws of morality do not apply. Because I don't think you'd hold people morally responsible in emergency situations. Right? It's like if there was let me give you an example. Say there was a guy having a heart attack, or there was a fire, and you had to break glass to retrieve either an AED or a fire extinguisher. Nobody would hold you morally responsible for making a mess and having glass all over the floor.
No.
You know what I mean? Like, they wouldn't see that as an act of vandalism, for example. But if you were to just go up and smash it and there was no emergency, they would say that's immoral because you're damaging private property. Right? Okay. But in an emergency, you wouldn't hold them, like, morally culpable for that. Because it's like, well, there's a higher order moral principle, like preserving a life or preventing property damage. So I'm going to break this little bit of glass to get to the stuff behind it, to get, and it says break glass on it, for example.
Well, in that case, yeah, the means justifies the end.
And Molyneux had another...
That's a special situation.
Exactly. Sure. Like, Molyneux had another example where he's like, say you were, I don't know, stuck on a balcony, and you had to climb out and climb down a fire, like a pole, and then you had to break someone's window to get back in, otherwise your only other option was falling to your death. He's like, like in a situation like that, you'd be like, you'd apologize, you'd be like, listen, I was going to die if I didn't break it, I'll pay for the damage. Like, they wouldn't say, like, you broke into my house. It's like, it was either that or you died, like, yeah, like, don't worry about it. It's like, we're not going to press charges against you as being, like, a thief or something like that. Or something like a vandal. Like, it wouldn't be the same as if someone did it with a different intent.
Right. Yeah, I think that's pretty cut and dry, too.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
All right, so next up, we're going to talk a little bit about what the Stoics thought about the idea of natural or divine law, I suppose as they called it. So they asserted the existence of a rational and purposeful order to the universe, a divine or eternal law, and the means by which a rational being lived in accordance with this order was the natural law, which inspired actions that accorded with virtues. That seems like a bit of a mouthful. The natural law first appeared among the Stoics, who believe that God is everywhere and in everyone, kind of like classical pantheism. According to this belief, within humans there is a divine spark which helps them live in accordance with nature. The Stoics felt that this was a way in which the universe had been designed, and that natural law helped us to harmonize with this. So I think Passio's work probably aligns pretty closely with this idea, where it's like, listen, there is something that designed the way things are now. We have something divine within us, and if we can get those two things to line up, it's better than if we don't.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to...
In its most simple form, and it's like, yeah, living in accordance with reality is probably better than not. I think we can agree on that, and it seems... and when you look at all the examples of why you'd have to tell people this, it's like, yeah, I guess you kind of would. Achievement unlocked. That's why. That's why we all love those. What about the Romans? The Roman dicks. What are they talking about? These natural law stems from the following. So, what nature has given to humanity, from what the human mind embraces, from the function of humanity, and from what serves to unite humanity. So, I don't know. It seems like a lot of Roman sophistry to me.
Yeah, I don't think that exactly lines up with...
Because, I mean, there'd be like an easy counterexample to all these, but, you didn't really want to counteract the Roman dicks a lot of times. They were pretty choppy. So...
And they had their emperors and such.
yeah, and they weren't too keen on the idea of constructive feedback. So, maybe we'll just...
They thought they knew.
Yeah, maybe we'll leave the Romans with their opinions.
Sure.
Then there was Cicero, who I swear to God, it seemed like he showed up late to the meeting, didn't prepare a damn thing, and was like Googling what they were talking about on his phone for the first 5 minutes so he could get caught up.
Yeah.
So what about natural law, Cicero? What do you think about... well, I think it contributes to the greater good. Oh, does it? And what is that exactly? So laws are for the safety of citizens, the preservation of states, to preserve tranquility and happiness of human life. It's like, okay, well, thank you for those miraculously profound platitudes of what makes things good. And so what about unjust laws? And he's like, well, those aren't real laws, right? Because inherent in the idea of law is that it's just and true. It's like, all right, well, that's convenient. So it's like, okay, well, if the system that you set up ends up being corrupt, it's just because it wasn't the real system. It's like, well, where have I heard that argument before? Oh, that wasn't real socialism. No, because if it was real socialism, it would have worked. It's like, okay. I get it. So your definition of your utopian system is the version of it that works. Okay. I get it. So, law for Cicero ought to be a reformer of vice and an incentive for virtue. It's like, okay, well, that's an interesting argument. So using the law to reform vice and incentivize virtue. I mean, on the surface, it kind of sounds appealing, right? It's like, okay, we'll use this law, which I presume would be the force of the state, to reform people of their vice and to incentivize them to be virtuous.
But as you said, the devil's in the details.
Yeah, a little bit.
So what do they consider a vice and a virtue?
Hey, buddy, is that a virtue you're demonstrating? Here's $5. There you go. Right there. Free tax money for your virtue. And then a reformer of vice, I don't know, what do they put them in gulags or something until they've reformed of their gambling addiction or something like that? I don't know. Cicero, maybe do a little bit more prep before you show up to the meeting, because it's, doesn't seem like a great argument.
Yeah, seems pretty general.
So the virtues we ought to cultivate, at the point of a spear, I presume, always tend to our own happiness. Oh, that doesn't sound solipsistic at all. And the best means of promoting them consists in living with men in that perfect union and charity which are cemented by mutual benefits.
Oh,
I
don't know about that.
You're kind of walking out on the ledge here now, Cicero. A little bit. Okay, so we're gonna have this perfect union and charity that we all sit around and kumbaya, bro.
Yeah, and again, Peterson talks about should happiness really be our primary purpose?
Well, no, because if it is, because the second you're unhappy, now your life has no purpose because it's been destroyed because you're unhappy. It's like, now you got to go find being happy somewhere else. It's like, well, what about meaning? What about responsibility? How about some of that? Maybe that'll help. As a side effect of happiness there. As a side effect, it's pretty nice, but I don't think it should be an orientation in and of itself. It's a little bit too narcissistic, I think.
And I think if you're trying to question people and how they think about things, it's not going to make them very happy.
No, it doesn't. Have you ever tried that? Have you ever tried to fundamentally question people?
I've angered people, and I've made people angry because I propose the idea that maybe their life has a purpose and a meaning to it, but they would rather fight for, no, there is no purpose to my life.
Okay, fine. It's like I gotta go meme. I'll be right back. So we gotta make a meme where it's the NPC face, and then somebody else tells them, "Hey, NPC face, your life has meaning." NPC face stares blankly. And then frowns. I love that meme. That's like one of my favorites. So the other thing that I found wrong with Cicero's argument is mutual benefit does not ensure perfect union or charity. I wish it did. It just doesn't really work that way. Freedom can be messy, but it seems to be better than the alternative, which is the gulag.
Well, and just reality itself is messy too.
Yeah.
Like just
You're not
living itself.
yeah. You're not going to be able to overcome that by just kumbaya feelings of living in mutual benefit paradise land. You know what I mean? It's.
I mean, I think a lot of us do want improvements of certain I guess, society and such like that. It's not. It would be in a way, it would be a good idea for us to be unified in the sense that, yes, we notice we're being duped, we notice we're being manipulated, and we want to empower ourselves with knowledge and act upon it.
It would be, but it's almost like, that allegory of the cave. It's like you're almost choosing the delusion over reality because it's better in a superficial way.
Yes.
So it's like it's very difficult to convince people of that, right?
Yeah.
I think that's going to be a huge challenge where it's sort of like, well...
But there's been barriers put in place as well to keep them that way too, partially.
Yeah, like if you try to criticize anything about like the public school system, it's like, well, you just don't want kids to be educated. It's like, what? They're not being educated now. So if I criticize anything about the way things are being done, it's like, well, then you just hate teachers. It's like, no, I don't hate teachers. Well, then you hate children instead. It's like, no, I don't hate them either. It's like, well, you hate somebody.
You're such a downer.
You're such a downer with your hating on the bloody public school system. It's like, well, if you don't think there's any room for improvement, then okay, I guess we don't really have anything to discuss. Like, if you think this thing is perfect, then yeah, by all means, continue to believe that. I'm not going to change your mind. So, I don't really...
So, but I would encourage you guys to have these conversations with people, to challenge people on their beliefs. Because a lot of beliefs are false anyways. They don't necessarily... Beliefs and opinions don't necessarily have
they're usually
a bearing on reality.
Yeah, they're usually just good enough for now. Right? This is all I know at this point, so it's the best I've been able to figure out is this is as true as it gets. Until I figure out something more true, and then I'll just switch to believing that instead, right? So you kind of have to be like, don't take your opinions so seriously, because they can change quite rapidly based on new information. And if you do take your opinions too seriously, you're probably going to be locked into that narrative, because you now have a bit of an ego on the line.
So. You want to be open to new knowledge, but you don't want to be completely stubborn as well. I think it's finding that middle ground.
Yeah, exactly. So, what do the Christians discuss here? So, I think when they talk about the natural law, let's see, a law written in men's hearts, recognized by man's reason, a law distinct from the positive law of any state, or from what St. Paul recognized as the revealed law of God. So they talk a lot about revelation with that kind of stuff, where it's like, hey, here are some truths that have been sort of revealed to you as being how things actually are. And it's an interesting argument. Hard to falsify. But,
Yeah.
Augustine of Hippo, who equated natural law with humanity's prelapsarian state, so I guess their pre-fallen state, before the fall of man or whatever. As such, a life according to unbroken human nature was no longer possible, and persons needed instead to seek healing and salvation through the divine law and grace of Jesus Christ. So, according to this Hippo guy, a life according to... Yeah, so basically, after the fall, you kind of have to accept that now you're vulnerable and have to follow these divine laws and follow the Christ example and all that stuff. So
okay, basically the one problem with that though is that I think we can't, if we're gonna wait for a savior to save us, then we're gonna be waiting forever and nothing's gonna change. Whereas, how about we become our own saviors?
Manifest those things yourself.
and manifest the Christ consciousness. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe try to encourage other people to manifest that in themselves as well, right?
Yeah, because
So-
there can be this passiveness with Christianity.
Yeah, I've kind of noticed that too.
And
in
I
some
don't-
ways, they're probably right about the kinds of things that you can't actually control. But
Sure.
in a lot of other ways, they may be giving up a little bit too much agency
Yes.
in terms of their ability to affect their own circumstances.
Yes.
So I guess that there's advantages and disadvantages either way. But it seems like the Augustine of Hippo, his point was basically that, sorry guys, we're now aware of our own vulnerability and we need to be more careful with our choices. So not in the Garden of Eden anymore, and we're mortal. So check out this guy Jesus, and he did some stuff. Try doing that. And things might work out a little bit better than if you kind of just stumble blindly around and try to figure it out for yourself.
Yeah, well, I'd say the spiritual principles of what he taught is the most, important thing.
Yeah, it's an interesting argument.
Mm-hmm.
So who's this next guy? Albertus Magnus. He restored natural law to its more independent state, asserting that natural law is a rational creature's participation in the eternal law. Seems like it's just sort of kicking the can down the road to another definition. But, yet, since human reason could not fully comprehend the eternal law, it needed to be supplemented by the revealed divine law. So I guess for Christians, natural law flows not from divine commands, but from the fact that humanity is made in God's image, humanity is empowered by God's grace. Living the natural law is how humanity displays the gifts of life and grace and the gifts of all that is good. So, natural law for Christians seem to be largely determined by three things, which is intent, circumstance, and the nature of an act. That's a little bit too relativistic for me. Consequences are not within human control and are therefore not relevant. See, that's kind of the problem that I have a
That's
problem
not
with.
good.
Yeah.
See the natural law that we were talking about with Passio, it's also described as consequentialism as well. So, I'd say no, the consequences do matter, and a good amount of them are within human control.
Yeah, so that's where they would maybe relinquish too much of that agency and
Yeah.
too much external locus to control here.
Yeah.
So it might be...
So here we're seeing a problem with organized religion.
Yeah. So as an aside, it might be worth distinguishing between a teleological or consequences-based morality and a deontological one based on a principle. So morality must be objective and universal, or the term sort of becomes synonymous with preference. So the Catholics. To know what's right, one must use one's reason and apply Thomas Aquinas' precepts. The reason is believed to be embodied in its most abstract form in the concept of a primary precept: good is to be sought, evil avoided. It's kind of like Google's old mission statement, don't be evil. It's kind of like this same Thomas Aquinas kind of stuff. They didn't really, do this good is to be sought. I mean, they seem to do it anyway. Their search engines are pretty slick, I gotta say. So, any rule that helps humanity to live up to the primary, good is to be sought, evil avoided, or subsidiary precepts can be a secondary precept. For example, drunkenness is wrong because it injures one's health, and worse, destroys one's ability to reason, which is a fundamental human function, basically, as a rational animal. So it doesn't really support self-preservation. Theft is wrong because it destroys social relations, and humans are by nature social animals, so it doesn't support the subsidiary precept of living in a society. So basically, human beings are designed for a certain function, so anything you do to impair that function would be a violation of natural law according to Catholicism.
Well,
I mean, I think some of the reasoning is kind of mental gymnasticy. A little bit like theft is wrong because it destroys social relations. Like, oh, how about it's just immoral because it's a violation of property rights? It's like, no, excommunication for you. So
yeah.
So natural moral law is concerned with both interior and exterior acts, also known as action and motive. Simply doing the right thing is not enough. To be truly moral, one's motive must be right as well. So, for example, helping an old lady across the road, which is a good act on the outside, to impress somebody, which is a bad interior motivation, would be wrong. However, good intentions don't always lead to good actions. The motive must coincide with the cardinal or theological virtues, and they are acquired through reason applied in nature. So this would be prudence, justice, temperance, and fortitude, which all seem to be, pretty good virtues to have. And,
yeah, we talked a bit about those in the Aristotle's Golden Mean.
Yep, so keeping that balance between things, and the theological virtues would be faith, hope, and charity. So these would be good things to do and a good mindset to have. So basically, if you don't have those, maybe you're not being as moral as you could be. I don't know. It's an interesting argument again. So,
but if the Catholic Church does promote so much charity, then why do they have like basically $1 million or possibly $1 billion palace and tons of riches?
Yeah,
stored within it.
I don't even know what's in there. Do they keep like gold and stuff?
Or they got it's made. A lot of it's made out of gold, and they've got priceless art.
What do they use? Euros? Like what is this? Because I mean, like even if it was built, it's like is the Sistine Chapel or whatever else is in the I don't know what else is in the Vatican. All the church buildings for the Pope. Okay, all the Pope buildings, whatever they're worth, it's like, well, what does that even mean? Like, who would sell them? Like, who would buy them? The papacy would never give them up. Like, it's not really something that you could exchange for money.
Well, but don't they say, doesn't it say somewhere in the Bible, like, it's harder for
a rich man to go to heaven than a camel to pass through the eye of a needle or something? Yeah. I'm not really sure what that means exactly. I think that's probably what you were talking about before, but that obsession with materialism, where it's like you're never really going to follow Christ's example properly if you're obsessed with buying new BMWs all the time. And going about all the effort to acquire the resources to do that. Like, you're probably just not going to orient yourself properly if that's what your goal is. Like, your end result is like, I just have to have all this stuff. If that's what it is, it's like, maybe that's more what he's talking about. What do you think?
I mean, to me, it doesn't really match up why, I don't know, an organization or group has to have this, super elite, mini city or, just...
Well, it's been around for, hundreds of years. It's pretty old, and people have probably paid for it through their voluntary donations in the collection plate.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, maybe they're involved in really sketchy things like human trafficking or something. I don't know, like, who knows how the papacy makes their money.
Why do they have to live like that if they're trying to promote charity? That's what my main point is. Like, why do they have to live like royalty or they're above everybody else or you know what I mean?
Well, it certainly looks quite beautiful, but did they actually live in the lap of luxury? Like, I don't know what their personal accommodations look like. I don't know if they have like Maseratis and big like limitless credit cards, and I don't really know what their deal is, but it certainly looks quite nice. But it also seems that, architecture and stuff like that, it's better for it to be beautiful than it is for it to be sort of brutalistic and concrete blocks or whatever. Like, what would you prefer to see?
That's not what I'm arguing, though. That's fine if they have a nice architectural
Is there too
building,
much?
But I'm just saying the funds, like, if they're... if they're supposed to follow Jesus' example and...
what would help more people? Giving them money that would build the Sistine Chapel to the poor, or building the chapel and having the poor visit it? For all of time.
It depends what the chapel's teaching them.
Well, like as a work of art, though. Like having it in the world would be more valuable than the money spent elsewhere. Does that make sense? Like having a place to pilgrimage to see, to witness, to like see all the nice paintings and all that stuff, like to be there with all those people in that place where that has all that history. Like, is that phenomenon not more valuable than the money it took to build it? And because it was built by the church, and if the donations were voluntary, it's pretty much up to them, so who cares? Right? Like, if the money's coming in by moral means, what they do with it is frankly none of our business, right? But do I see that you're pointing out that maybe it's a little bit hypocritical to live in a life of luxury while you're also saying that we should help the poor with charity? Like, yeah, I can see that argument if that's what they were doing. And if they are, then yeah, screw them. But I think the problems with the Pope now are more profound. I think he's going, like, embracing a lot of these leftist ideas.
Mm-hmm.
He's all about the climate change and all this stuff now, too. And it's like, okay, well...
And they have a huge pedophile problem within many of their...
Yeah, they've had that issue for a while. But, the public school system has a pedophile problem. Every institution that involves children has a pedophile problem because it's where the pedophiles go. Right? I don't like the fact that they've covered up a lot of it, but I don't like it when any of those institutions cover it up. Whether this is a problem with the Catholic Church, yeah, I think they made a lot of bad decisions in how they chose to handle it. Like, rather than turning over the priest to the authorities, like the police, they just moved them somewhere else. It's like, well, that doesn't really fix anything. And now you're just moving the problem over there. And what if you molest a kid over there? That's on you, right? But it's like, okay, well, we got to preserve the institution and blah, blah. It's like, I think the church can survive, a scandal like that. It's like, hey, it turns out one of our priests was a pedophile, so we fired him and we sent him to the cops and they threw him in jail. Like, oh, okay, so problem solved. It's like, yeah, now what we're going to do is make sure that there's more screening in place to make sure that these pedophiles don't get in and blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, you can't take back what happened, but at least now you're trying to find a solution to make sure it never happens again. But they didn't. They just kind of said, well, screw it. We'll move him somewhere else and
It doesn't seem like they're getting to the root of it.
No, not even close. They're just brushing it under the rug because it's easier. It's laziness, but they're human beings. So obviously they're lazy. It's like, well, why would we hold the church more responsible because these people are supposed to be all like holy and whatever else, but it's like, well, maybe they're just people that sweep things under the rug all the time because they're just idiots and they're lazy. And they can be immoral too. There's no way to justify it, right? It's just like, it's unjustifiable behavior, but it's like, if you want to understand why they did it, it's like, well, because it was easier than not doing it. Like, how much more of an explanation would really be necessary, right? There might not need to be some, like, crazy conspiracy where the church is involved in, like, child sex trafficking. It's probably like, no, they were probably just embarrassed, didn't want to get their hands all over it, so they figured, hey, if I just move this guy somewhere else, the problem will go away and I won't have to think about it.
We can look more into that later, I think.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot more to it.
But yeah, that organization needs to get itself sorted out big time. So I think it does help a lot of people. But it also is corrupt. But what institution would be immune from that corruption? If
I don't think there could be.
Yeah, so you always have to be maintaining them, always revivifying them and bring life back to them.
And I don't think you need to be really part of an institution to be, let's say, spiritually enlightened.
Yeah, I'd agree with that as well. I think that organized religion, it has its ups and downs. I think for some people it distills and simplifies a lot of the ritual and brings a lot of community. But then on the other hand, it means maybe you don't necessarily need to engage with the ideas as seriously because somebody else is doing that for you.
So one thing we got to consider too is that the original meaning of religion comes from the Latin verb regulare, which means to hold back or bind. And we need to carefully consider that because, yes, religion does bring people together, and that is a positive aspect. It does have this communal aspect to it. But I think
it means to hold back, so there is an element of tyranny to it, in a sense, because it's sort of saying the only reason we can bind ourselves together is because we're also agreeing what we're not going to do.
And you must agree with everything this authority says you should believe. You shouldn't question really anything that maybe this organization does.
Yeah, I think that happens once it becomes corrupted. That's when you start getting those kind of attitudes. Because initially, I don't think there would be that if the message was strong enough in and of itself, because it would survive challenges to questions, right? But once it no longer can, or there's no longer desire to answer those questions, then it just becomes, just don't question it, this is the way it goes, right? Mm-hmm. So according to Aquinas, to lack any of those virtues from before is to make a moral choice. So if somebody, for example, consider a person who possesses the virtues of justice, prudence, and fortitude, yet lacks temperance, due to their lack of self-control and desire for pleasure, despite their good intentions, they will find themselves swaying from the moral path. So it's basically like 4 legs of a chair. Mm-hmm. You have to have all of them, or if you are missing one, the whole chair is just going to collapse. So some of the other religious aspects, Islam, for example, survival of the fittest is understood to be a strong component of natural law. So divine law can be found in the prophets. The Ash'ari school talks about the human mind can know of the unlawfulness of an act through the 5 maqasid, or higher intents of the Islamic Sharia, to protect religion, life, property, offspring, and reason. And there's another school, the Maturidi school. Good and evil can be known without revelation. Stealing is wrong because people work hard for their property. Killing, adultery, alcohol consumption are all self-evidently evil to the human mind. basic goods include religion, life, reason, lineage, property, and honor. So that's sort of what they see about the natural way things go.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting arguments. So there seems to be stuff in there about, property and life and protecting reason and all these kind of things. So it seems like there's, in those particular schools of thought, doesn't seem to be differentiating too much from the other religious practices.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. What about Thomas Hobbes? So founded a theory of legal positivism of what all men could agree upon. Good luck. What they sought, happiness, was subject to contention, but the broad consensus could be formed around what they feared. So violent death at the hands of another person. So we might not all agree on what we want, but we all know what we don't want. So we don't want our property rights violated. We don't want to be killed by other people. So natural law was how rational human beings seeking to survive and prosper would act. See, that seems pretty straightforward. So it's like, listen, you're a rational person. You want to survive. You want to prosper. Do this. Don't do this. That's natural law, according to Thomas Hobbes. So, in his opinion, the only way natural law could prevail was for men to submit to the commands of a sovereign, or the sovereign. Because the ultimate source of law now comes from the sovereign, and the sovereign's decision need not be grounded in morality, legal positivism was born. Natural law is a precept or general rule found out by reason, of which a man is forbidden to do that which is destructive to his life, or takes away the means of preserving the same, and to omit that by which he thinks it may be best preserved.
So he says, submit to the commands of the sovereign. Does he mean the ruler?
I guess so. Maybe that's what he's talking about, because he was saying that it's like, maybe he's acknowledging that because the ultimate source of law is now coming from this individual, it doesn't actually have to be grounded in morality, because the guy could just not be moral.
Well, that's
so,
not good.
I don't know, maybe he wasn't advocating it, but that seemed to be how he saw it, at least. So then there's John Locke. So if a ruler went out against natural law and failed to protect the life, liberty, and property, people could justifiably overthrow the existing state and create a new one if they want. I find that kind of interesting, where he's like, people just overthrow the state and then just make a new one. It's like, well, why would they make a new one? Isn't that what got them into the problems in the first place? Like, why would they just build it again? We'll do the statism right this time. It's like, okay. So then there was, Aquinas, who talked about it being participation in the eternal law and is discovered by reason. So this, I think, is interesting how, if you look at like the some of the old religious stuff we talked about, Aquinas was saying now that it's like, it's an eternal law that exists all the time, but it's discovered by reason. So it's not so much revelation, but it's discovered by reason. It's a revelation of sorts, but it's maybe a little bit more internal. I don't know. Natural law is based on first principles. The first precepts. The good is to be done and promoted, and evil is to be avoided. Yeah, so we went over that before. Let's see. Yeah, Thomas Aquinas refers to animals as dumb, and then the natural order has declared animals for man's use. So Thomas denied that human beings have any duty or charity to animals because they are not persons. So otherwise it would be unlawful to kill them for food, but human beings should still be charitable to them, for cruel habits might carry over to our treatment of human beings. It's not the most robust argument against violence against animals, but I guess it'll have to do. It's like, hey, we should just be charitable to animals, because, you know what, if we start beating animals, we might start beating people. It's like, okay, well, why don't we just not beat animals, because that seems like unnecessarily cruel. It's like, yeah, but, we might start beating people. It's like, all right, whatever. Thomas contributed to the economic thought as an aspect of ethics and justice. He dealt with the concept of a just price. Oh goodness, here we go. Normally, it's market price or a regulated price sufficient to cover seller costs of production. He argued it was immoral for sellers to raise their prices simply because buyers were in pressing need for the product. Sounds like a bunch of commie nonsense, eh, Tim? Bloody communist. So, Aquinas was careful to distinguish the just or natural price of a good from the price, which is manipulated by another party. Bloody socialists, eh? Their ideas go back pretty far. He determines just price from a number of things. First, just price must be relative to the worth of the good, which is determined by what, other than price? I'm not really sure. Aquinas holds that the price of good measures its quality. So the quality of a thing that comes into human use is measured by the price given for it. Sometimes he puts the cart before the horse. He goes out on to say that the price of a good, measured by its worth, is determined by its usefulness to men. The worth is subjective because each good has a different level of usefulness to every man. Aquinas argues then that the price should reflect current value of a good according to its usefulness to man. So, a few problems here. Oh yeah, he also didn't like interest rates on money. To take usury for money that is lent is unjust in itself because this is to sell which does not exist, and this is evidently takes into inequality which is contrary to justice. So money and other similar goods are only consumed when they're used. Charging a premium for money lent is a charge for more than the use of the good. Thus, he concluded it's immoral or whatever. So, the problem with this, I suppose, is he fails to account for the risk undertaken by the lender, and that's the value that's added to the service. So absorbing risk in the market is probably what facilitates the flow of funds, creation of businesses and jobs, right?
So that would justify interest?
Yeah, because you're incentivizing lending money by allowing people to put a price on it. So, for example, it's like, say a guy needs a loan for $10,000 to build a shed, a really, really big, expensive shed with lots of cool stuff in it. So we're both like, okay, well, we both have 10 grand to lend him. So like, well, shit, we both want this guy's business because he's going to pay us interest to do it. So I say, okay, listen, I'll charge you an interest rate that means you're paying me back, $11,000 at the end of a year. And you're like, okay, well, you can pay me back $500 at the end of a year. In fact, I'll give you 2 years and that same price. And it's like, okay, well, you just undercut me, and now you get to give him the loan instead.
Okay.
So there's still competition when it comes to lending money like that, right? And the interest rate is the price of lending money. It's what incentivizes it. Because if you couldn't incentivize the lending of money, nobody would ever lend it, right? You'd absorb no risk in the market, and you wouldn't have nearly as much job creation. Sometimes the investors take a bath, but that's just it's like sort of like gambling, right? But if they're smart enough to make the money, they're presumably smart enough to invest it. Not always, but it's possible. So, what other was there anything else you really wanted to go over in terms of natural law? Was there anything that you think we left unaddressed?
Yes, actually, there was probably a lot.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can think about all of it right now.
Well, we can always do a part 2, a part 3. We can come back to this.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so if this is something that you guys are interested in, definitely shoot us an email or let us know in the comments of whatever service you're using this on, and we'll take a look. But yeah, I guess we'll just have to go by the download numbers. If people are really taking an interest to this episode, we'll come back to it.
Yeah, I mean, as we said before, feel free to comment and ask questions. We'd like to have that conversation with you guys. We'd like to know what you're thinking. And I think we're going to explore this some more. And overall, thank you for joining us and listening as always.
Yeah, exactly. So the only thing I'd have to add is there was just other topics. We didn't look at how Judaism, Plato, Adam Smith, David Hume, Adam Ferguson, any of these other ideas. So there's a ton of other schools of thought on natural law that we can look at. So if you guys really, really want to hear a different perspective on it or an evaluation of the arguments used by a different group of people, we can definitely take a look and see what the merits are. But I think the concluding idea here would be that, it's good to live in harmony with reality, because then reality won't smack you in the face quite as often.
It's good to be aware of these principles so we can act properly and orient ourselves to a better future, for sure.
Right on. Well, on that note, we'll see you guys on the next episode. Have a good one.